The Fortnight for Freedom is drawing to a close. We look at the challenges the movement faces. A powerful storm takes aim at the eastern seaboard. Will it impact your 4th of July plans?
Its purpose is not to divide, but to end divisions. Divisions which have lasted all too long.
President Lyndon Johnson speaking 50 years ago today. What people are doing to remember the signing of the Civil Rights Act. And a new addition to the Pope's team to reform the church. We find out who he is and what the Cardinals are doing today. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, July 2nd, 2014. Good evening from Washington. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. Looking at your news now. That recent Supreme Court ruling declaring buffer zones around abortion clinics unconstitutional is meeting with stiff resistance in Massachusetts tonight. Governor Deval Patrick and Attorney General Martha Coakley are joining forces with Planned Parenthood and NARAL, trying to find ways around the ruling. Today, they're looking at asking for changes to state laws to, quote, provide women with safe access to quality health care, end quote. So they're talking about encouraging police to use crowd dispersal laws against those blocking access to clinics. They're also looking into possibly requiring people to keep a clear path open for patients arriving at abortion clinics. Now, this case was just one of the religious freedom wins at the Supreme Court during this term. The court's allowing prayers to continue at town hall meetings. Of course, just this week, a major win for Hobby Lobby and Conestoga Wood in their challenges of the HHS mandate. The victory comes just as U.S. Catholics are celebrating religious freedom in a special way. Our Jason Calvi has that story from USCCB headquarters here in Washington.
That's right, Brian. The U.S. bishops have called this Fortnight for Freedom from June 21st through Independence Day, July 4th. It's happening in parishes across the country. It's an opportunity for Catholics to pray, defend, and promote religious freedom.
We as Catholics and we as Christians speak up about this, because if we don't, we're handing this off to our children and our grandchildren, and they're not going to be able to speak up about it.
Terry Schilling stands for marriage, life, and faith. As the executive director of the American Principles Project, he joins this chorus. These Americans supporting the traditional definition of marriage have faced one defeat after another, and courts are issuing more decisions across the country.
We can't shy away from it. We can't be afraid of the names and the insults that are going to be thrown at you for taking a stand on this. Pope Francis is very forthright in how he talks about the importance of every child needing a mom and a dad, and how marriage is only between a woman and a man. But he's also not hateful. He's also embracing of people with homosexual tendencies.
Some constitutional experts say the Supreme Court may step in on this issue in the coming terms.
Well, I would hope that the Supreme Court, when it does decide on this next year or the year after that they do affirm the state's rights to define marriage as between a man and a woman.
And the prayers for religious freedom continue during this Fortnight for Freedom. It's the third fortnight the bishops have held in the United States here. Now, the final Mass for this Fortnight for Freedom will be taking place just about a block from where I'm standing right now. The celebrant of the Mass will be the Archbishop, the Cardinal of Washington here in D.C., and the preacher will be the president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference, Archbishop Kurtz. Brian?
Now, some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Now to the case against the suspected mastermind of an attack against an American consulate in Libya. Prosecutors say Ahmed Abu Hatalah's 2012 attack in Benghazi killed a U.S. ambassador and 3 other Americans. Wyatt Goolsbee is at the federal courthouse here in D.C. And Wyatt, what did the judge say today?
Well, Brian, today Magistrate Judge Deborah Robinson ordered Ahmed Abu Hatallah to remain in U.S. custody. His lawyer did concede that it did make sense that he should stay locked up, his client stay locked up based on the charges. But his attorney also said there's still no evidence to show that Abu Hatallah was involved in the 2012 attacks that killed U.S. Ambassador Chris Stevens and 3 other Americans. Abu Hatallah only appeared briefly in court today. he listened to proceedings from a translator through headphones. In court papers filed last night, the U.S. Attorney's Office said the Libyan militant has continued to target Americans with deadly and destructive intentions. Brian, they say that he's part of an extremist group that not only organized the Benghazi attacks, but he also had sought to obtain weapons to defend himself from any potential U.S. retaliation afterwards. Abu Khatallah pleaded not guilty on Saturday. Brian?
Now, Wyatt, this isn't the only crime that Khatallah is suspected of committing. Could we see more charges against him?
Yes, it's possible that on the U.S. Attorney's side, we could get more details if the Justice Department decides to issue at least any more new indictments. But at this point, Brian, they don't have any firm timetable as to when that might happen.
Wyatt Goolsby at the federal courthouse here in D.C. Tropical storm Arthur is on the move tonight. Forecasters have canceled the tropical storm warning for Florida. They now expect Arthur to cause problems for North Carolina and Virginia. They say the storm could strengthen and possibly hit North Carolina's Outer Banks as a hurricane on the 4th of July. Talk about bad timing. Then they expect it to move northeast and away from land by the weekend. Meanwhile, more than 1,000 firefighters are working to try to control a wildfire raging through California's wine country. The fire has spread to more than 5 square miles, and it's only 30% contained. Officials have evacuated some 200 homes, and another 180 are threatened in Napa County. No injuries have been reported in connection with this fire. Doctors have found a 12-year-old girl accused of stabbing a classmate to please a fictional online horror character mentally incompetent to stand trial. Police say the girl and her friend plotted for months to kill another friend to win favor with Slender Man, a character in horror stories they read online. The two girls are accused of attacking the 12-year-old victim in a park near Milwaukee a month ago. The stabbing victim has since been released from the hospital and is recovering at home. A psychologist says double amputee Olympic runner Oscar Pistorius is suffering depression and PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. This doctor warns Pistorius could become a suicide risk. His defense lawyer read from the psychologist's report describing the athlete as severely traumatized after killing his girlfriend, Reva Steenkamp, last year. The report was compiled during a 30-day observation period at a state psychiatric hospital. Pistorius claims the killing was unintentional. He is on trial in Pretoria, South Africa, for premeditated murder. Some new numbers tonight on presidential popularity. The just-released Quinnipiac University poll says the current president is at the very bottom of the list. A third of voters polled say President Obama is the worst president since World War II, but his Republican predecessor didn't fare much better. 28% of those polled called George W. Bush the worst president since the Second World War. On the other hand, people seem to like the Gipper. 35% of Americans call Ronald Reagan the best president since World War II. 18% say it was Bill Clinton. Well, it's part of our history that changed the direction of our nation. 50 years ago today, the Civil Rights Act was signed into law. Laura Cole reports tonight on how people are remembering this monumental occasion.
Now, in this summer of 1964, the Civil Rights Bill is the law of the land.
It changed our nation, tearing down barriers, bringing opportunities for every American. On this 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act becoming law, many visited the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial to commemorate.
Seeing all of this and where we've come today from where we used to be, and to see this site.
I'm an American, and every single thing that symbolizes America is seen in that act. And I'm just proud to be here.
And this is the document that was signed by President Johnson 50 years ago today. Many coming to the National Archives just to get a glimpse at our nation's history.
This bill really allowed the path to start where if I was an African American, I no longer had to sit in the back of the bus.
Marlene Sallow with the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights says during the summer of 1964, people were harassed, even beaten, standing up for equality.
They stood for what they believed in, and they forged forward, and their fight for equality ultimately led to the establishment of the Civil Rights Act.
A turning point in history.
A turning point in history that's celebrated especially today. But for some, today is also a reminder of the fight still to come.
Injustice is still injustice, and it's still here. And we're still fighting. But we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go.
At the National Archives in Washington, Laura Cole, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Laura. The legacy of the Civil Rights Act continues to grow and to change. Dean Nelson with the Frederick Douglass Foundation is with us tonight. In these 50 years since the signing, Dean, has the Civil Rights Act accomplished what it was set out to do, and how has it fallen short?
Sure. Well, I think, Brian, in many ways that the Civil Rights Act needs to be celebrated. It was a huge accomplishment. You had many blacks who, during those days, fought strong to see that legislation passed. I think there are a lot of things that we can celebrate 50 years, but I think that as we look from this point forward, there are a lot of other challenges, not legal challenges, but other challenges within the black community and in America as a whole that need to be faced. And I think that some of those things deal with the family, the breakdown of the family that we've seen over the last 50 years, education. Today we have fewer people, say, from Washington, D.C. that actually go on to college than at that particular time period. So there's a lot of things I think that need to be evaluated for the next 50 years.
And there's some great efforts out there. I want to look at those in a moment. But first of all, the Civil Rights Act not only protects people against racial discrimination, it deals with other things like gender and sexual preference. Does it bother you to hear like gay rights being compared to civil rights in this context?
Yeah, it does bother me. When I think about the civil rights movement, that was a movement of righteousness and justice that was born clearly out of the institution of the black church. No person during that time would have dreamed that the hard work and the commitment and the sacrifice that they were making 50 years ago would at all be used to advance an agenda that they would have considered immoral. So I think that there are a lot of groups that have tried to mimic and to use the civil rights movement as a model, and I can understand that because it was so successful. But however, I think that many civil rights leaders who are still alive today, Walter Fauntleroy, who is a minister here in Washington, D.C. as one, sees that there's no comparison really to the gay rights struggle and the righteousness, justice struggle of the civil rights movement.
And quickly, what is the Frederick Douglass Foundation and other collaborators doing moving forward?
Sure. Well, the Frederick Douglass Foundation is committed to righteousness and justice, liberty and virtue. And what we're trying to do is to help inspire within the African American community a recommitment to righteousness and justice, working with organizations like the Acton Institute that look to solve economic disparities from a free market, faith-based perspective, or other groups like the pro-life groups, Priests for Life and Father Frank Pavone, because during that time period we did not see the disparity of high abortion rates within the black community, and we feel like that is a civil rights issue of our day.
Thank you for your perspective. Dean Nelson with the Frederick Douglass Foundation. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Coming up, it's no longer the Gang of Eight. Alan Holdren reports on the newest member of this elite group of cardinals. And New York's Brooklyn Bridge will be set ablaze with dazzling fireworks for the 4th of July. Thanks for joining us for EWTN News Nightly, the 2nd of July, Wednesday evening, and Pope Francis continues meeting with his Cardinals Advisory Council. He's now added his Secretary of State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, to what was the Council of 8, so now there are 9. Our Rome correspondent Alan Holdren is covering the meetings. Alan, what's the news out of there today?
At this point, Brian, they're in their 2nd of 4 days of discussions. They're talking about 3 things in particular today, which is the roles of different departments. The first was the Vatican City-State and its government. The second was the Institute of Religious Works, which is called the Vatican Bank. And the third was the Secretariat of State, which is considered the most powerful of all of the Vatican departments. At this point, they're only discussing these things. They brought in cardinal experts from each of the 3 departments to give them an update. We spoke with the Vatican spokesman this morning, who told us, journalists, in a briefing that we can't expect anything on the short term as far as concrete reforms. This has become the refrain of these meetings.
All right, Alan Holdren reporting from Rome. You may have heard the statistics, young people dropping out of church and leaving organized religion behind. A new book called Got Religion explores that trend and how some communities are dealing with the shift. The author of that book, Naomi Schaefer-Riley, is joining us. So millennials are this age group from 18 to 29. What does the research say about their trends in church attendance?
Well, as you know, there was a famous, now famous Pew study that came out a couple of years ago that showed that 30% of Americans under 30 are not religiously affiliated. They're now what we refer to as the nuns, the N-O-N-E-S, not the N-U-N-S. And it shows that they may believe in God. They're not necessarily atheists. They may be very spiritual, but they're not interested in an affiliation with an institution. And this supports other trends that show that there is a vast distrust of a lot of different institutions that this group has.
Is this just the normal rebellion of young people, or is there a reason, a particular reason why they're turning away from organized religion?
Well, one major reason is that they're putting off marriage longer and longer, and religious institutions have traditionally relied on marriage as the vehicle by which young people come back to churches and synagogues and mosques. And unfortunately, as the age of marriage is now 29 for men and 27 for women, people are putting off and they're getting used to being away from church for a much longer time.
What an interesting connection, and it really does make sense. So you've done a lot of research on the ground. What kind of church structure has been most successful in drawing these young people back?
Well, I traveled around the country, and I think there are a lot of lessons we can take from some successful examples. One thing that's definitely worked is religious leaders who hand over responsibility. You know, as we live longer and healthier lives, a lot of people in churches are hanging on to the roles that they have in church for much longer. And so if you're a 20-something in church, often there is nothing for you to do. You could show up or not show up any particular week because there is some 50, 60, 70-year-old who has been serving in a volunteer role for 30 years now, and they don't want to give up control.
So they have to pass that on to
absolutely.
the younger generation.
Handing over responsibility is key.
Yeah, you wrote a chapter specifically on the Catholic Church. How is the church doing in training lay people as spiritual leaders?
Well, the chapter that I wrote focused on a group called ACE, the Alliance for Catholic Education out of Notre Dame. It's kind of known as the Catholic Teach for America, but one of the great things about it is that it's sending these young people in that crucial time period right after college into Catholic communities, and it's really having them own their faith, take responsibility for their faith at a point when many people right after college just kind of are still trying to find themselves and may, through inertia, just decide not to join a church at all.
Well, if they're excited about it, I'm sure they're going to be much more attracted to it and stay in it too.
Yes, there's an extreme kind of service element to it, and they seem like this is the next group of, I think, lay leaders for the church.
Very interesting. Got Religion is the book. Naomi Schaefer-Riley, the author. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Well, gun enthusiasts are excited about a new law in Georgia. The Georgia Safe Carry Protection Act takes effect today. The new law allows people to carry guns into places like bars and churches, but the law still allows private property owners to prohibit you from carrying a gun on their property. So don't try taking a gun to Mass. The Archdiocese of Atlanta and the Diocese of Savannah are among those still banning guns on their property. Archbishop Wilton Gregory and Bishop Gregory Hartmeyer approved a joint decree on the issue. It forbids anyone, including clergy, from having a gun or even a long knife on church property. Priests are allowed, though, to keep a gun locked up in the rectory. Americans are preparing to celebrate the 4th of July. New York's iconic Brooklyn Bridge will be featured in one extra special pyrotechnic display this Friday. These barges filled with fireworks are floating in a secret location until Friday. 60 licensed pyrotechnicians will put on a fireworks show that includes cascade effects coming off the Brooklyn Bridge.
We've got 5 miles of wire, 50 firing points on the bridge, 5,000 special effects just for the bridge alone. And one of the most dramatic pieces of the show is going to be this rainbow firefall that's going to come between the two towers, that's going to come forth from the lower level of the bridge and flow into the water.
It will be awesome, perhaps one of the most dazzling displays of the nations there in New York. They're doing on a grand scale what so many of us will be doing in parks and fields in small towns around the country. Up next.
That machine is a lifesaver. I wouldn't be here if we hadn't got it.
A look at an experimental gadget that's helping people breathe for another day. And we check out some of the movies you might want to see over the holiday weekend. We're grateful you can join us for EWTN News Nightly, Wednesday, July 2nd. I'm Brian Patrick. To breathe is to live, but breathing requires healthy lungs. A new experimental gadget might buy time for people with lung problems.
How do you feel today?
Jonathan Sacker was out of options. His double lung transplant was failing, unable to get rid of life-threatening carbon dioxide. And there was no artificial lung to buy him time while he waited for another transplant.
As a family, we had pretty much decided to turn off the ventilator.
But then one of his doctors at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center recalled an experimental device called HemoLung, not yet approved in the U.S. Acting like kidney dialysis for the lungs, the machine removes the dangerous CO2 from the blood.
And in essence, what we're doing is providing external support to the native lung by having an artificial lung outside the body doing 50 to 60% of the work of the native lung.
Within 36 hours, Sacker's team got permission to use HemoLung and had one brought from Canada in the middle of the night. 20 days later, he got his second pair of new lungs.
That machine is a lifesaver. I wouldn't be here if we hadn't got it.
While HemoLung bought Sacker critical time, researchers say it's just one step forward in the ultimate goal of a portable artificial lung, still years away.
Just as the technology for artificial hearts, these artificial lung devices will transition so that patients can one day go home with them.
Sacker has a long way to go, and rejection is still possible. But the experimental treatment shows the need for more bridges to connect desperate patients like Sacker to the lungs they need. And scientists who reported in January that they found a simple way to make stem cells are backing away from those claims. This after accusations that they faked some of the data. The researchers originally claimed they could transform ordinary mouse cells into versatile stem cells by simply exposing them to a mildly acidic environment. But today, the scientific journal Nature released a statement from the scientists acknowledging extensive errors. Scientists hope to harness stem cells someday to grow replacement tissue for training a variety of diseases. NASA taking global warming research into outer space. The agency launched a rocket carrying a satellite this morning. It blasted off from an Air Force base in Central California. That satellite will study how the environment absorbs carbon dioxide. The launch was scheduled for yesterday, but was postponed because of equipment failure. If you're still interested in the World Cup now that the U.S. has been eliminated, today is a day of rest. Play in the quarterfinals will start Friday when France faces Germany and Brazil goes up against Colombia. Of course, Team USA will not be moving on. Belgium knocked us out 2-1 in overtime yesterday. Goalie Tim Howard made a record 16 saves in that heartbreaking loss.
Hey, Father, how can I help you?
You must be Catholic. It's the second time you've called me Father.
Well, I was an altar boy at St. Ignatius. I was raised Catholic.
That was a behind-the-scenes clip from the exorcism thriller Deliver Us from Evil. The movie is from the same director as The Exorcism of Emily Rose. It's in theaters today. Decent Films movie reviewer Stephen Gradanis joined us by Skype earlier today, and he gave us his take on Deliver Us from Evil.
It's based on the real-life exploits of a New York cop who became involved in demonology and in trying to help people who have problems with demons. The other thing is the priest, Father Mendoza. He is Latino, and he brings a very different vibe from any other big screen priest that I've ever seen. He's become one of my favorite movie priests. I enjoyed Deliver Us from Evil. I think people who have found meaning and value in scary movies may appreciate it, but it's certainly not for everyone.
All right, we also asked Stephen for his top summer movie picks, what to see, what to avoid.
Box office for families. There are only a couple of films even aimed at families, and the ones I've seen so far, Disney's Maleficent and DreamWorks' How to Train Your Dragon 2, are not very good. In fact, they have anti-family themes that are a real concern for me. On the other hand, there is a film out there for adults that has a very positive father-son relationship, unlike anything I've seen in a long time. It's the indie film Chef. I should warn you that there is some language in that film, but a film with a very positive moral message.
You can read Stephen's reviews at decentfilms.com. Well, there are a lot of crews out there working to prep roads for 4th of July holiday travel tonight. The goal is to make things easier for drivers, but sometimes if it's not done correctly, there can be confusion. Take a look at the mistake made by a road painting crew. 2 lanes are supposed to say right turn only, but one of the lanes is spelled N-O-L-Y. Project managers say he thinks the crew was just in a hurry. Now, if it said H-O-L-I or H-O-L-Y, I would have taken a right turn thinking, that's the highway to heaven. July 4th coming up. So a lot of you are sending your patriotic photos into us already. Here's one my family sent. My grandson Wyatt in his patriotic red, white, and blue saluting a Navy fighter at a recent Cincinnati air show. We'll show you more later in the week. You can send your pictures to us. Just go online, email your photos to us at newsplanning@EWTN.com. Thanks for joining us tonight. We're here again tomorrow night. We hope you'll join us then. Until then, follow us on Facebook and Twitter and watch us again on YouTube. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night and God bless you.